that's also good for hardening off vegetables, seedlings you've grown indoors. The last thing is, since this is a grid and it's all about the density, how much I can grow, making sure I'm growing enough in those squares. On the back, I've sort of given you an idea of the alternatives, so you can kind of visualize what we're talking about. In any of the squares, you could do any of these configurations. Some of the larger plants like broccoli, in one 12 by 12 square, you would simply put one plant right here in the center. That would be the plant for that square. Something smaller like lettuce, you would put 3 or 4 in here, and that would be that square. Beets and spinach would have 9, and then you can even go smaller with radishes and carrots. So again, that's what it's talking about. These pictures are one square with 4 plants. Each of them is one square. So that's kind of how you figure it out. And he's got a table in there that talks about, you just look up the plant and it'll tell you how many per square. But if you don't, if it's not covered in his book, you're growing something unusual, you can figure it out. If it's 3-inch spacing, then you just do your normal 3-inch spacing. So that would be 3 here, 3, 6, 9. You can calculate it yourself. So I think those are the main highlights. I'll add one other thing that we just learned, which I should have put on the sheet, is you have to account for the soil to settle a little bit after you fill it up. So make sure that you have enough of the initial soil mix to keep it really nice and high, because as it gets watered and wet, it's going to sink down a little bit. So, and then you have to mix up a whole new batch, which is the challenge. We have pictures here, and what we did in terms of the mixing is we had a giant blue tarp, and then we piled the ingredients, the vermiculite, the peat, and then we sort of just rolled it back and forth. So sort of the tarp lifted it up a little bit, then we held all the corners and sort of mixed it around.
So it was very simple. They have samples of the 3 materials there, and the Mel's mix that Paul mentioned is actually just 1 to 1 to 1 by volume. So I have tons of these buckets because there's a pool company near my house, and those, you don't have to worry about the weight and figuring all those calculations, because there's the volume. It's just like a cup, a cup, a cup. I don't even need to know what the volume of those buckets are, as long as I know they're the same.
Right. So, for example,
we just mixed until there was enough.
One bucket of peat, but the point I wanted to make is your third bucket would need to either be all really good quality kitchen compost, or you'd have to have 3, 4, or 5 different, some cow manure, some back guano, some worm castings, all in this one bucket. That would be your third. So every time you're doing a third, it's several different composts in there.
So what we did for this one was a general compost that I have for my house. It's what Paul mentioned, a very wide mix. And then over there, taking up 2 parking places, is the what is it? I always forget the name of the mulch. Remington mulch, which is a commercial mix, which he warns against using just one, because the idea would be maybe they sourced it all from one place and your nutrient balance might be skewed in one direction. So
it can be a real challenge to find if you have to buy, which I've ended up doing because I hadn't started composting yet, to call around and find out who has what. Especially early spring, I'm surprised how it takes them a while to get things like the worm castings out on the shelf. I got those at Merrifield, I think, and I was in there in April or March, and they hadn't brought them out yet, or hadn't gotten them in yet. They'd ordered them, thinking, wow, that's kind of late, April, and still not have them out. So even think about the fall, getting things like my routine now, keeping a garden journal like a good gardener does, and I've written down for my October-November date. I'm assuming they're going to have it in October, November, I don't know. But I'm going to go and buy some of the worm castings and keep them under the deck outside in their bags. So first thing in the spring, when I'm ready to do my radishes and early peas and stuff, I can get some of that right out of the bag and not worry about the store not carrying them yet. Stock up on the vermiculite and things like that. But again, you don't have to add vermiculite later. You don't have to add peat later. You just have to add the compost things, yeah. Leaf mulch?
we want to explore whether that could be substituted for the peat moss.
Right.
But I don't.
The leaf mulch. So it would be leaf mulch, vermiculite, and then compost. No peat. The 1/3 would become the leaf mulch as a substitute. And then as you see here, we have the bed sitting on top of just some shredded hardwood, right? And we have a liner underneath that to keep things from washing under because it's an irregular bottom. But that's supposed to help keep, not only makes drainage go through better, and it's always excellent soil, so drainage is never a problem with a good square-foot garden. But the idea is to also keep the heat from the paving from really bothering the roots of the plants below. So we have sort of like a little bit of a buffer there.
This is a very hot location.
Right.
And that's why we...
And I have black asphalt, it's very hot, right next to a very, white house. And what I used was, I did pea gravel right in the bottom of my planter. So, and again, there's some pictures there if you watch it through. So what I did, mine's higher. So I had 3 boards. So I put the one board together, empty, right on the asphalt. I put down some of the black weed material, the weed cloth, stapled it on top of the board because it was the bottom board. Put in some pea gravel, a whole bunch, about 3 inches all the way around. And then I put another layer of the weed cloth on top. So I made like a little bit of a sandwich and stapled it once more. And then I put the next boards down, the next 2 sets of boards over so you wouldn't see any of the cloth. And then I put my soil on top of it. So that's my attempt to make sure that the drainage comes out and flows well, and also to give it a little bit of a buffer. Now, pebbles may not be as good because they may heat up a little too. I don't know. That was what I thought about at the time and ended up using, but they should last for a long time.
That's true.
They won't decompose because it's going to be very hard. But when I dig around, it's really funny because I can hear a little bit. I can hear, I haven't punctured yet, and I don't think I will because you don't really have to till a lot with this. But I know they're still down there and they're still working, and I hope that in the end that works. But it is a hot environment, absolutely. We've had schools that elementary schools or whatever that have done planters for their kids right on hot surfaces, and they had a lot of problems.
Oh yeah.
Minimum depth and hot surfaces are a challenge. So.
The other issue with that, Paul, is I know one of the schools was using this. What do they call it? It's like an expand-a-cell. It's some patented thing, and you just pull it apart.
Like an accordion.
Yeah, like an accordion. But then they filled it with a potting mix, which really is only 2 components of this. It's the peat and either the perlite or vermiculite. It was too light a soil. So, of course, school being out in summer, just literally a day or 2, and that soil didn't work. Whereas the sponginess and the nutrients with the compost here gives you a little bit heavier mix. You still, like you say, it's quite aerated and well drained.
It's just a real pleasure to dig in the soil when you go out there. You just think how wonderful it is. And I'll tell you something else too. This fall, based on talking to some folks here and elsewhere, I did a cover crop. I decided a green manure is the correct way to refer to it. It's a winter rye, and I decided in 3 or 4 of my planters I would go ahead and do that just to see how it worked and to know what it's like. And I did that, and it was a real experience because I had great coverage. I did it in October. You plant the seeds, very small seeds, and then I got it almost looked like a grass that came up. Is it some of it there?
This is triticale. It's a rye wheat hybrid. It just comes out shorter. It's a shorter stature than the rye, but it's very similar. And it's starting to head up to the back. And then the front is a crimson clover, which is a real crowd pleaser, but unfortunately we got it in so late that it didn't compete as well with the triticale. But we're going to let that head up the back. It's kind of fun, to see like, hey, this is a grain. This is where bread comes from.
So you can do everything you can do in a normal garden that's set right here. Your plants are set right in the ground with the square-foot garden. I did the fall planting, and it grew beautifully all winter. And then in the spring I went and I tilled it up, which was a little bit of work. So it was a real learning experience to till under the. And you can either trim the tops and compost that and then till the roots in, or just till the whole thing down, which is what I did. And then you have to give it a couple weeks to let it sort of decompose. And then you can plant either sow seeds or put your seedlings in. And that's kind of what I did. So I'm going to be curious to see what the soil looks like. I think I did it mainly, the reason you do something like that is a couple reasons. One is to sort of, if you have tight, tough clay soil, it can help bust up because the roots are pretty intense. They're pretty dense and they go pretty far down. They went to the very bottom to the weed layer where the mat was. So it was completely, and that was in the taller planters, completely full with the roots, but they're very fine. So they definitely will decompose and break down. So you do it to break up the soil if you need to. That wasn't my challenge. You can do it to prevent weed seeds from getting in because you have it covered with this other plant that sort of makes it harder for the other plants to grow. It actually is a chemical toxin. It doesn't.
Oh yeah, the rye. In fact, you mentioned 2 weeks. If you don't wait those 2 weeks,
a lot of things don't want to grow.
Yeah.
But this covers well for your winter annuals like chickweed and those things that would come up instead.
And you can do cover crops that are in the family to get some of them.
Oh yeah, that's the reason the
Right.
clover grain combination is a nice one.
Which helps with your
I did a straight clover in mine, actually because this is a confession, because the clover was planted so late, that one in back here was transplanted from my garden. So I want to make sure there were some blooming ones. All those ones are blooming in my garden, and if you can leave a little bit, that's a pollinator resource too. But of course, what Paul mentioned is it fixes nitrogen, adds nitrogen to soil.
So I think that I've covered pretty much the main things about square-foot gardening, and we can certainly chat about any other questions you have. But I will end by saying that one of the most interesting comments I get from people that aren't gardeners who come and see when they visit me is they say it all looks so organized because of the grid, you know, and the wood planters. And not that I keep it neat and clean or anything, but they really respond to that. So people look at that like, if I'm not comfortable with nature and the chaos, and square-foot gardens look nice.
I want to put in a plug. There is a book actually called A Gentle Plea for Chaos in the Garden.
Right. All I'm saying is that's a selling point if you have a spouse or partner or someone who may not be crazy about you turning some things into vegetable gardening, that even though they might want to eat the results, but it might look a little bit better.
I can see that it really helps with succession planting. Because my tendency is to say, okay, I've got this, had the radishes, I should sow the entire thing. I cannot, you know. And so this way, I think I would be a little bit more controlled.
I'm also not really good with getting ready for this talk, and revisiting his book was a great reminder about the idea of not letting any squares go empty, because I was doing that. Not a lot, but some. And it's a good reminder to me that I really should. And I planted actually a lot more this spring now, because I have some peppers and some tomatoes and some eggplant seedlings growing in the basement under lights, and I'm not putting them out yet, although soon, right? So there are spots where I have, and you see my planting plan is there, the little boxes on the printout. So I had them empty, and I never even thought about, of course I can get radishes in 30 days, because they're not, you know, this was a month ago. But I'm thinking in my plan, I had the spots, and that's where the tomatoes go, and so it's good, I'm good there, let it go. And then I read this book and prepared for the talk, and I'm like, no, I need to put carrots in there, get some radishes in place, and I'm doing it. I mean, it's great. I don't even like radishes, but planting them just to see, and spring is much better for me with radishes than the fall. So it definitely keeps you more motivated, gets you going. I agree.